this talk is about. It is called the Iranian Diplomatic Shift, in brackets, as the organizers of the conference have put it so. Understanding the motives, interests, and implications of what is happening in the country. And we are going to aim to discuss a few subjects which are the motives behind this shift, or whether this shift is true and genuine, the interest involved inside and outside of the country if there is a shift. And by shift, we're referring to the change of policies since Dr. Hassan Rouhani has become the new president of Iran since August when he was sworn in. And the policies, as you may have heard, or if you followed the news at all with Iran, have strategically changed noticeably, including the talks recently with the 5+1 and the American officials. As one said, in the past month, they have met face-to-face and had more conversation time than they have had in the past 35 years, all put together. So it is a noticeable difference. We're going to understand what it means for Iran, what it means for the neighboring countries in the region, and what it means for the relations of Iran with the rest of the world. Let me introduce to you our panelists today. First of all, I'm very happy to say that we have Dr. Ahmed Sadeqi, the deputy of the Institute of Political and International Studies from Iran, the think tank related to the Foreign Ministry of Iran, who has come all the way from Tehran with messages of the Foreign Minister of Iran and representing the Iranian government. Thank you very much for joining us today. And then we have Mr. Adil Al-Mahdi, former Vice President of Iraq between 2005 and 2011, author of a magazine and newspaper publisher as well, a journalist to my heart. Karim Sadjadpour, Senior Associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace in Washington, D.C. Robin Wright, author, analyst, journalist. The list goes on for the past many decades since she's been covering Iran and the neighboring countries. And Kenneth Pollack, also author, researcher, and senior fellow on foreign policy at the Saban Center for Middle East Policy in Brookings Institute, the think tank in Washington. Thank you very much for joining us on this panel. Maybe start with Dr. Sadeqi. Everybody is talking about this shift, which we have put in brackets on the subject of this talk today. Can you tell us what is the thinking behind it, please?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I am the deputy of the Institute for Political and International Studies in Tehran. It's my pleasure to be here in the broader country of Iraq and also the Kurdish region. First of all, I would like to express my genuine desire and prayer for Imam Jalal and for the well-being of him, that we miss him here. And it's my pleasure to be among the distinguished officials, especially Dr. Zibari here, and my pleasure to be among the eminent scholars to share some views on Iran. I come from Iran, the country of peace and stability in a region prevailed by turmoil and violence. Among the signs of a stable Iran was the latest presidential election of June 2013, in which the Iranian nation once more manifested that they could take use of every single opportunity in order to further bolden their civil society in a democratic fashion. The election showed once more that Iran is a model nation in the region in terms of Islamic democracy and civil society, whose elements of Islamic beliefs, national values, and political, cultural, and social developments are eminent. Among the numerous candidates with competitional campaigning and diversified viewpoints and agenda, people chose someone with a moderate thinking. As the late architecture of Islamic revolution, Imam Khomeini stated, the Islamic revolution of Iran was a revolution of word and discourse. Therefore, the people of Iran expected their new administration to represent the main ideas of Iranian great Islamic civilization with a plausible tone, and this main task forms the basis of new Iranian foreign policy and diplomatic approach. While the election of Dr. Rouhani in the presidential election indicated both the elements of continuity and change in the main discourse of Iranian politics, if we compare the current administration with the former ones in terms of their underlying concepts and basic approaches, we notice that never in the last 34 years has a candidate had such a mandate from both below and above, and never before had a candidate occupied the political center effectively enough to command respect from both the so-called left and right, and also the election was indeed a consensus building measure both among the people and the elite, and it indicated that real establishment of the political system is on the scene. The cohesion in the cabinet ministers in terms of expertise, pragmatism, and moderation has helped the administration to have a stable and institutional decision-making process. Therefore, the main motive for administration now is to fulfill the wish and expectation of the voters, both in domestic and foreign policies of Islamic Republic of Iran as well. The modifications in Iranian diplomacy are not in a tactical nature, but a genuine one, not only in the nuclear dossier, but in Iran's neighboring and regional policies. In regional terms, the administration is following a policy of establishing the peace and stability of which the main mechanism is maintaining the status quo in defining Iranian foreign policy in its neighborhood, both in the short and the long term. As an implication, the administration's moderate agenda out of the eminent popular presence in Iran election emboldened the election as a model to be followed as the main source for any change and transformation in the region. The message of moderation, peace, and stability is on the rise in the region while it is suffering of chaos and conflict. As it has been the trend in post-9/11 2001 policies of Iran, it has been fully prepared to employ its capacities to counter violence and diffuse conflicts. The current administration is more vigorously following the same path to engage in serious negotiations with regional and ex-regional actors in order to reduce regional conflict and bringing back the peace and stability. Iraq and Afghanistan clearly exemplified such a role by Iran. Indeed, Iran has sought mutual interest with other players in preserving stability in both Iraq and Afghanistan and in curbing the influence of extremist elements in the region. Meanwhile, if some actors may think that democracy building is possible by means of foreign intervention without indigenous background and against the will of people, or some other regionals and ex-regional parties short-sightedly consider the exacerbation of current regional crisis, violent or sectarian rifts as their political agenda, let's be clear that it is a wrong impression to consider that such means as a statecraft. The dangerous currents prevailing in the region have potential to spill over to other countries in the region and to disintegrate territories, and situations might go out of control. Once more, it has to be emphasized that the only rational choice is going back to the vote of people as determining mechanism for change in the region. The Syrian nation, as mentioned by the distinguished scholars and people in the former channel, as well as the Bahraini people, deserve to have their self-determination by going to the poll. As a step forward, crafting a regional mechanism based on calling intra-regional paradigm is necessary, in which neighboring countries could confer the means and the ways for strengthening the regional peace and stability based on the following elements. One, to counter the foreign intervention in internal affairs of the region. Two is establishment of regional arrangement and architecture to manage the regional security in the regions, for example, in Persian Gulf. Trying to solve the regional conflicts and disputes with friendly and conciliatory framework, especially by promoting the role of neighboring countries. And also to boost regional peace and stability through cooperation in the fields of energy supply, transit, transportation, and electricity sharing, like the one that is, on the way, going with, between Iran and Iraq, Iran and Turkmenistan, Iran and Pakistan. Therefore, for all these reasons, I consider President Rouhani's administration of moderation and hope represent a moment of opportunity, and it is an asset on the table and bring it new possibilities for engagement and cooperation. This is mainly because the sanction regime or threat won't lead to any form of peaceful resolution of conflicts and differences. Thank you for your notice.
Thank you very much. So the message coming from Iran is one of continuity and change, and a mandate from below and above for fulfilling the wishes and the expectations of the voters. A new message is coming from Iran. Let's go to Robin Wright, who's the most recent one of us, besides Mr. Sadeqi, to have come from Tehran, to have visited firsthand, experienced this shift in policy or this new message. Robin, can you tell us what your experiences were like, and how much of this message did you feel when you were there?
Well, I'll pick up on what Mr. Sadeqi said, and I echo some of his points. First of all, I think we've seen a new political reality evolve in Tehran, one that changes the tone of the last 16 years. The first 8 defined by reform efforts, the second half by more conservative or hardline elements. And I describe those who have been elected as the realists. They are looking at what it would take to live in the real world. They understand the trends of globalization. They, as proud Persians, want very much to be a part of it. And I think that's the political reality. It's not just the election of one man. It does reflect a vote, but it reflects, I think, a real change in tone. This is a little bit off color, but I will say it anyway. Someone explained it to me. It's like President Clinton, but without Monica Lewinsky. I also think that there is something much more profound than a new election with a new president. I think Iran is going through what I consider a strategic recalculation. It's looked out on the region, and it has begun to see the kinds of changes over the last decade that are changing the balance of power. A decade ago, in an interview I did with King Abdullah of Jordan, he used the term for the first time, the Shiite crescent, to describe that arc radiating from Tehran into Baghdad, into Damascus and Beirut. And afterward, his office called me and said, please, please don't use that term. And I said it was on the record. Sorry about that. But that is defined in some ways the way the outside world has looked at Iran. I think Iran looks at itself today in a very different light, particularly with the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraq and the drawdown from Afghanistan. And now it looks at the region and sees itself surrounded by what I call the Salafi circle. It is the rise of Al-Qaeda franchises on several borders, the deepening of Wahhabism or Salafi, the deepening sectarian divide, the potential emergence again of the Taliban in an important or political role in Afghanistan, and that this strategic recalculation takes into account a lot of the much bigger and broader issues. The irony is that the U.S. buffer created a decade ago has disappeared, and Iran, I think, actually, for all its pride and achievements, actually feels a little bit vulnerable. And the danger that the allies of Saudi Arabia, the Sunnis, may be more of a strategic threat than they had been a decade ago, and that it suddenly shares interests with the United States on a whole range of issues in the region. I was very struck that I've covered Iran now for 41 years, and I've been trying to get into the old U.S. embassy that was seized by students in 1979. I've been trying to get in for 33 years. And I not only got in to see it in Tehran, but I went to see one of the three masterminds who led the takeover. And he was talking about how 35 years ago, he used all his energy to push the United States away from Iran and outside the region. And today, he is using all his energy to try to heal those wounds, because he believes that when it comes to issues of terrorism, that the United States and Iran actually share strategic interests. And I thought that was a little anecdote that explained the change in tone. We so often look at what Iran's motives are, we in the West particularly, as being motivated by what's called crippling sanctions. And there's no question that sanctions have had an important impact on Iran, particularly the banking sanctions. But I covered the Iran-Iraq War, and in those days you could go into a store and you'd see very little on the shelves. There was rationing of meat and gasoline and basic commodities. Today, business is still booming, whether it's at the malls, the Grand Bazaar, the tech center, where they have 3 floors of stores that all claim to be the official franchise for Apple. And that sanctions are an important influence, but not the only one. What struck me so much is that Iran is still haunted very much by the Iran-Iraq War. We talk about that in terms of the role of the Revolutionary Guards and how they became powerful players out of that conflict. But it's really the, I think, public psyche that is still deeply haunted by that war. When I talk to people who said the reason they were so supportive of the nuclear deal is because it meant that they wouldn't have to wake up and worry about bombs falling. They didn't have to worry about going to school in the middle of the afternoon to take their children out because there'd been an attack. They remember the War of the Cities in the 1980s and the missiles that struck Tehran. There's a sense that Iran really doesn't want another war. And I think we underrate those, its own recent past. I also think there's a factor in the kind of post-revolutionary generation. The demographics, the majority of Iran's population has been born not only since the monarchy, but since the revolution, and they now make up over half the voters. And that's a very important factor in, particularly for the aging revolutionaries. Creating a system that is adaptable and acceptable and is sustainable and beyond their own time. So I kind of believe that the government of God, even though it has lofty ideological goals, has plummeted to earth and is very realistic, and this reflects the election of the realists, in terms of what it wants, both at home and in the region. And that Iran is also looking today beyond the region. It really wants pride of place that reflects its great contributions during Cyrus the Great in introducing principles of human rights and freeing minorities, that they really want a larger role, a bigger place, that is not just supporting Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad. They want something that makes them players in the international community. And I guess I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, Robin. You finished with the goal of this new government is very realistic, as you said, and this president is a realist. Let me take you on this note to Karim Sadjadpour. Last year at the same forum, you spoke about Iran, and you quoted Henry Kissinger, and you said Iran has to decide whether it's a nation or a cause. 1 year on, plenty of changes. Referring to what Mr. Sadeqi and Robin also said from the facts on the ground and ambitions, what do you see is really happening? I'm sure there are obstacles and hindrances and realities, as Robin mentioned as well. How can this thinking move through this?
It's a great question, Pooneh, and I preface my comments by saying it's wonderful to be back, Dr. Barham, and I said last year that I very much look forward to attending one of these open dialogues at an Iranian university, and I hope that time will come very soon. I agree with both Dr. Sadeqi and Robin that you do have an enormous popular will for change to see in Iran, which pursues its national interests ahead of ideological interests. But I wouldn't say that that tension between being ideological and being nationalistic has been totally resolved yet. I would say that Iran is very unique in the world in that it's a country which simultaneously or interchangeably employs ideology, it employs sectarianism, and it employs nationalism. It's actually one of the most ideological, sectarian, and nationalistic countries in the world simultaneously. You see certain relationships like with North Korea, Hamas, Venezuela, which are built on kind of a common ideological worldview. You see other relationships in Iraq, in Bahrain, and Lebanon, which are built on a common Shiite affinity. And you see the Iranian government very effectively employing nationalism with regards to its nuclear program, invoking the tremendous desire of the Iranian people to be like other countries around the world. So you know, I would say that that tension hasn't been resolved. And to put it in a domestic Iranian context, the debate between those who want Iran to be a cause, a revolutionary cause, and those who want Iran to be a nation, I think is playing out with the new Rouhani government. Within Iran, those who follow a much more ideological worldview, they call themselves the principalists. And they say that they're loyal to the principles of the 1979 revolution, to the ideals of the 1979 revolution, which in terms of Iran's external policy is very much based on resistance against America and resistance against Israel. And I think you have in the new Rouhani government, in particular with the foreign minister Zarif, a reflection of the popular will to put national interests, economic interests before ideological interests. And you know, I would argue that both of these groups within Iran are loyal soldiers of the revolution, and both of them want to preserve the Islamic Republic. I think there's been some misguided analysis which compares Rouhani to Gorbachev. I would say that you know, what Rouhani is trying to do is not to get rid of the Islamic Republic, certainly, but to strengthen the Islamic Republic. And the argument that the principalists make is that when, in fact, Gorbachev tried to reform the Soviet Union, when you start to compromise on your ideals and principles, it becomes very dangerous and the entire system can unravel. And what the pragmatists, people like Rouhani, Hashemi Rafsanjani say, is that in order to preserve the Islamic Republic, we need to start putting our economic interests first. But I don't think that this debate has been resolved. I think it's going to play out over several years. Now, with regards to the specific question, what are the signs that Iran has changed, that Iran has turned the corner, and what are the signs of continuity? I think there's some very concrete signs that Iran has changed. And one example is the Iranian delegation, which is here this year, which wasn't here last year. It's a sign that Iran is very much interested in engaging with the outside world. The phone call between Hassan Rouhani and Barack Obama was unprecedented. The first time in 35 years that the president of the Islamic Republic of Iran, the president of America, spoke via telephone. This was an incredibly important taboo that was broken. And I think that certainly dialogue between American officials and Iranian officials normalizing, this is a sign that Iran has changed. But there are also important signs of continuity. Iran continues to support the Assad regime. Iran continues to chant death to America every week at Friday prayers. And Iran continues to support groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad. And I want to emphasize this particular point because I would argue that the biggest source of tension between America and Iran is not the nuclear issue. It's Iran's position toward Israel. In my eyes, seeing this from Washington, D.C., American-Iranian relations will never fully normalize as long as Iran does not moderate its position toward Israel. And here I would like to end on something which Ambassador Zarif said, Foreign Minister Zarif said in an interview with David Ignatius, because David Ignatius asked Zarif the question you just asked me about, is Iran a nation or a cause? And what Foreign Minister Zarif said is that there's no contradiction between Iran's ideological pursuits and its national pursuits. And I'm just going to cite two statistics which I would argue contradict that, to argue that Iran's revolutionary ideology and its national interests are in contradiction with one another. The first is a statistic which remarkably Iran's new Minister of Science, Aghay Faraji Dana, cited, that Iran loses 150,000 people per year to brain drain, costing the country $150 billion a year. That's, I think, a clear sign that as a result of Iran's ideological pursuits, the economic welfare of the Iranian people is being compromised. And the second statistic is the fact that in 1978, Iran's GDP per capita was double that of Turkey. Fast forward 35 years, Iran's GDP per capita, or GDP I should say, is half that of Turkey. I think it's worth repeating that. 35 years ago, Iran's GDP was double that of Turkey. Today it's half that of Turkey. So my critique of kind of Iran's ideological pursuits is the fact that I think that Iran, based on its human capital, on its civilizational heft, on its natural resources, Iran really has the power to be a major global player. Iran, like Turkey, in my opinion, should be part of the G20. But as long as Iran continues to put these ideological pursuits first, I think it will remain only a regional player, if not a regional spoiler, rather than the global player that I think it could be.
Thank you very much, Karim, Sadjadpour. On the note of regional player or regional spoiler, let's go to Mr. Adil Al-Mahdi, former Vice President of Iraq. During our conversations in the past few minutes, the words that have been mentioned are the Assad regime, Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran's interest in the region, regional paradigms and the inter-Iraq cooperations that Mr. Sadeqi was suggesting have to happen with Iran and the neighboring countries. What do you think are the implications of this change in policy and the change in government in Iran for example, Iran-Iraq relationships specifically and the rest of the countries in the region?
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أولا الشكر الجزيل إلى منظمي هذه الندوة الرائعة الأخ الدكتور برهم وإلى كافة المسؤولين الحاضرين هنا. أولا في موضوع إيران، هل أن فعلا إيران غيرت سياستها الخارجية وهناك لغة جديدة في طهران؟ بالتأكيد هناك تغيير في السياسة الخارجية الإيرانية وحتى في السياسة الداخلية الإيرانية، لكن السؤال الذي يطرح نفسه، هل هذا التغيير تغيير أحادي؟ هل هي الوحيدة التي تغيرت أم الآخرون أيضا تغيروا؟ هناك تغير في كافة الدول من كافة الساحات تجاه إيران، والمسألة في اعتقادي ليست العقوبات وليست كما ذكر قبل قليل، رغم أن العقوبات تلعب دور، لكن الأمور في المنطقة بلغت إلى قعر الأشياء، إلى أدنى مستوى ممكن لن تعالجه سوى الحروب الواسعة، سوى الحروب الكبيرة التي هي بطبيعتها حروب جربناها، جربها الجميع، جربتها الولايات المتحدة، جربتها أوروبا، جربتها إيران، جربها العراق. هي بطبيعتها حروب قاسية ومرة، من الصعب جدا العودة إليها، ولعل عدم الذهاب إلى حرب في سوريا هي في معانيها إحدى نتائج هذه التجارب القاسية. بقينا أمام الحروب الصغيرة، اقتتال داخلي في سوريا، متفجرات في لبنان، بعض الأحداث في ليبيا، في مصر هناك اضطرابات، في اليمن، في البحرين. كل هذه الحروب الصغيرة أيضا أصبحت تكلف، أصبحت تقود المنطقة إلى مزيد من الفوضى، مزيد من التفكك، مزيد من توفير البيئة والأجواء للعنف، الطائفية، الإرهاب، كما يحصل اليوم من تطور في العراق. إذن كل اللاعبين أو كل اللاعبون الدوليون في وضع حرج. ليس إيران فقط مسؤولة عن هذه القضايا، وإنما الجميع اليوم. الكل يعترف أن دور الولايات المتحدة في الشرق الأوسط لم يعد كالدور السابق، سياسة فك الارتباط وسياسة عدم التدخل بشكل واسع باتت هي السياسة الرسمية المعتمدة من الولايات المتحدة. وهذا ليس بدون سبب، هذا ليس بدون سبب، لأن ما حصل هو أن المنطقة تعامل، وأنا استمعت للكلمة الأخيرة وحقيقة قد لا أوافق على الكثير من مفرداتها، كأنما هناك معيار مثالي يجب على الجميع أن يقترب من هذا المعيار المثالي، على إيران أن تعمل كذا، على إيران أن تعمل كذا، على العراق أن يعمل كذا، على دول المنطقة أن تعمل كذا، كأنما هناك آلهة نحن نقدم لها الاعتذارات أو نقدم لها مدى إيماننا أو مدى قربنا من شيء موجود. في الحقيقة هناك مشكلة كبيرة لدى كل الأطراف، لدينا نحن في المنطقة ولدى الأطراف الأجنبية، لدى الأطراف الغربية لديهم مشكلة أيضا في النظر. الشرق الأوسط ليست منطقة غير معرفة، الشرق الأوسط منطقة معرفة، لكن ليس أبناؤها من عرف هذه المنطقة. الشرق الأوسط الغرب هو الذي عرف المنطقة، فرنسا وبريطانيا. لذلك الشرق الأوسط، الشرق الأدنى، مقاربة مع الدول المركزية، مع المتروبول. فنحن نعرف هذه المنطقة بالشرق الأوسط، نعرف هذه المنطقة بأنها منطقة الشرق الأدنى، لكن أبناء المنطقة أنفسهم عندما يريدون تعريف منطقتهم بسياسات صحيحة أم خاطئة يقولون هذه ثورة، هذا تطرف، هذه طائفية، هذا تمرد، إلى آخره. المنطقة معرفة من قبل الدول الغربية، يجب حماية إسرائيل. إذا إيران تريد أن تقدم براءة إلى المجتمع الدولي، إذن يجب أن تنورماليز ريليشنز with إسرائيل حتى ترضى عنها الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية، لأن حماية إسرائيل هو جزء من منظومة المنطقة. النفط، الممرات الاستراتيجية، قناة السويس، الإنزال الثلاثي عندما حصل في قناة السويس، لأن الدول الثلاثة إسرائيل وفرنسا وبريطانيا كانت تعتقد أن هذا حق لها وليس حق أيضا إلى أبناء المنطقة. فالمنطقة معرفة، وهي معرفة من قبل الغرب. ومنذ سقوط الخلافة العثمانية هناك فراغ كبير لدى أبناء المنطقة في بناء البديل. ما هو البديل الصحيح الذي يجب بناؤه في هذه المنطقة لكي تستطيع أن تتعامل مع العالم الخارجي؟ العالم الخارجي لديه نظرة إلى هذه المنطقة، لكن نحن كأبناء منطقة لم نشكل إلى حد الآن نظرتنا إلى العالم الخارجي. من أهم الأعمال التي تم القيام بها لتعريف هوية المنطقة هي الثورة الإسلامية في إيران. يجب النظر إليها من هذه الزاوية، يجب عدم النظر إليها فقط لأنها تخالف مصالحنا، سواء كنا دول في المنطقة أو كنا دول خارجية أجنبية خصوصا في الغرب. الثورة الإسلامية في إيران كانت محاولة لإعادة تعريف المنطقة بالاستناد إلى، كما ذكر الأستاذ أغلو في هذا الصباح، بالاستناد إلى قضية الحداثة، العصرنة، قضية التراديشنال، التقليد، وقضية العيش مع هذا العالم. كانت هناك محاولات، وأنا أذكركم في بداية الثورة الإسلامية لم تكن العلاقات سيئة، لم تقطع العلاقات بالولايات المتحدة، وكانت العلاقات جيدة إلى أن استقبل الشاه وفهمت إيران أن هذا تدخل، ثم حصلت قضية السفارة التي ذكرتها رايت الآن، قضية احتلال السفارة، ثم سلسلة من الأعمال بحيث دمرت الثقة بين الطرفين رغم أن هناك مصالح مشتركة، ورأيناها في كل المقاطع بين الولايات المتحدة والجمهورية الإسلامية وإيران. في أفغانستان كان هناك موقف مشترك واحد، في الكويت كان هناك موقف مشترك واحد، في كل المفاصل التي عشناها خلال 30 سنة الماضية كانت هناك مواقف مشتركة. في العراق كانت هناك مواقف مشتركة، الطرفان الرئيسيان اللذان اعترفا بالنظام العراقي كانت الولايات المتحدة ومعها مجموعة من الدول الغربية وإيران في القضايا الرئيسية. إذن هذه الثقة فقدت بسبب هذا النوع من التصادمات. وما أنجح الملف النووي هو لفترة طويلة من الزمن كانوا يتكلمون عن بناء الثقة. المسائل الفنية حلت منذ فترة ليست بالقصيرة، ونحن نعلم حتى قبل مجيء حكومة الرئيس روحاني كانت هناك مباحثات، حتى قبل مجيء الحكومة كانت هناك مباحثات، وكانت هذه المباحثات دائما تتوقف في مسألة الثقة، كيف نستطيع أن نخطو الخطوة الأولى، كيف نستطيع أن نثق لنرفع جزء من العقوبات أو لنتعامل مع هذه القضية أو تلك، أو نسمح بنسب معينة من التخصيب. عندما انتقلنا من قضية الثقة، عندما أزيلت مسألة الثقة مع مجيء حكومة الرئيس روحاني، وأنا رأيت الوزير ظريف قبل ذهابه إلى المحافظات قبل مغادرته إلى المطار وكلمني بهذا الفهم أن قضية الثقة الآن من غير الممكن بنائها، يمكن كسر الجليد، ممكن إزالة بعض الشكوك، لكن ليس بالإمكان الآن في هذه الظروف مع كل هذه التعقيدات في المنطقة، في البحرين، في سوريا، في فلسطين، في العراق، في كل هذه القضايا، في العقوبات، في التحدي، بناء الثقة. إذن لنترك موضوع الثقة. وأعتقد أن المرشد عندما عبر بمرونة المتصارعين لم يكن يتكلم عن بناء ثقة، بل كان يتكلم عن روح فروسية أو احترام قواعد لمتحاربين، لمتصارعين هم متصارعون، لكن يريد احترام هذه القواعد، على الأقل في هذه الفترة احترام القواعد لكي تبنى لاحقا بنجاح بعض الخطوات، ممكن أن تبنى لاحقا بعض عناصر الثقة بين الطرفين. فأعتقد يجب أن لا ننظر فقط إلى ما يحصل الآن في المنطقة من أحداث وصعوبات، وما يحصل في سوريا وما حصل في مصر بعين سلبية فقط، بجانب سيء فقط. أنا أعتقد أن المنطقة تعيد بناء نفسها، وكما في كافة التجارب الأخرى في أوروبا، في الهند الصينية، في أمريكا اللاتينية، مرت عقود من الزمن والمنطقة بكافة مقوماتها الداخلية، بكافة تشكيلاتها، سواء كانت دولة مع دولة أو في داخل الدولة كما عندنا في العراق عرب، أكراد، سنة، شيعة، تعيد تركيب نفسها. لا مفر إلا أن نعيد تركيب نفسنا، تعيد تركيب نفسها، ولا طريق الآن إلا للتدافع. يصل هذا التدافع أحيانا إلى حالة من الصدام المسلح، لكنني مؤمن أعتقد في النتيجة كل هذا سيحتوى من جديد، لأن الطبيعة العامة لمسيرة المجتمعات هي التلاقي في النهاية وليس التحارب إلى ما لا نهاية، خصوصا أن المنطقة تحمل تاريخ طويل من الحضارات، من القيم، من الضوابط. وأعتقد أن التجربة العراقية والتجربة الإيرانية، للجواب على سؤالكم لكي أنتهي، قطعتا شوطا طويلا. في العراق رغم كل السلبيات التي ذكرت في صباح هذا اليوم في ندوة العراق، لكن نحن في العراق قطعنا شوط كبير، وقد تكون هذه المشاكل هي دليل أننا تجاوزنا 10 سنوات ونحتاج إلى نضج جديد، إلى رؤية جديدة، إلى توازن جديد في داخل البلاد. وأعتقد فعلا أن إيران تؤثر إيجابيا على العراق، وليس كما يقال تتدخل في العراق بشكل سلبي، وإنما لإيران دور إيجابي في العراق. لكن نعتقد أن الدول العربية خصوصا المملكة العربية السعودية، تركيا، يجب أيضا أن تتدخل، أن تشارك، أن تمد اليد بشكل إيجابي إلى العراق لنستطيع أن نعمل إطار حقيقي للعمل. أعتقد اليوم في المنطقة اللقاء بين روسيا وأمريكا، اللقاء بين السعودية وتركيا وإيران بشكل رئيسي مع أطراف أخرى، العراق، مصر، دول أخرى، أوروبا، ممكن أن يشكل إطار لحل سلسلة من المشاكل، منها مسألة الإرهاب، منها في القضية السورية، في الخليج، في اليمن، في البحرين، سلسلة من القضايا. وأعتقد هناك فهم ونضج جيد جدا الآن تشكل جدا. حتى خطاب اليوم رئيس وزراء الإقليم خطاب صريح مباشر، فيه كلمات واضحة يجب التعامل معها سواء اختلفنا أو اتفقنا، لكن هذا كلام صريح لم نكن نسمعه سابقا. يمكن أن نتفق حول هذه القضايا، ولدينا جميع المباني والمفاهيم اللازمة لحل كل هذه الإشكالات. أتوقف عند هذا الحد وشكرا.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Adil Al-Mahdi. You mentioned confidence and trust, whether even Iran and Iraq and the rest of the countries in the region need to play that game of being called the Middle East and trying to gain the trust and the confidence of the Western countries. Let's go to Kenneth Pollack. Kenneth, we have talked about what has been going on in the minds or behind the scenes in Iran and the decisions that have been made. What I want to hear from you is the other side of the argument in the West, specifically in America, how they are treating this new vision, new shift, or new maneuvers coming from the Iranian side. And again, as I mentioned with Karim, there are obstacles domestically. I'm sure there are obstacles on the other side. There are hardliners on both sides. How do you think they hear this conversation, this message?
Sure. Thank you, Pooneh. And I think a good way to start with that is I'd like to just say to Mr. Sadeqi, I was President Clinton's Persian Gulf director at the White House when President Clinton tried to make the rapprochement with President Khatami. And I just have to tell you how wonderful it is to hear words like that from an Iranian official. And I say that, A, because it's true, but B, because I also think that it does reflect where the Obama administration is. My sense of the Obama administration is that they do see a very different tone coming from Tehran, and they are very eager to explore whether there is the possibility, first of a nuclear deal, and then of a wider rapprochement. And I think that you have to see it in those terms. So we've been talking about a whole variety of different factors, but for the United States, for Washington, for the Obama administration, it really does start with that nuclear deal. If we can get that, there is a hope that that can be parlayed, that that can become a door to a wider relationship with Iran, one where we could look at other issues, regional issues like Syria that we were talking about beforehand, Iraq, and a whole variety of other regional issues. But without that nuclear deal, I don't think anything happens. And I'll start by saying that, move on by saying I think it's clear that President Obama wants this deal. He said it in the election campaign. He's staked a lot. He has both domestic political and strategic reasons for wanting it. It's also, I think, something he hopes will be part of his legacy. Second point, as you mentioned, Pooneh, just because the president wants it doesn't mean that it will necessarily be so. There are big problems out there, and I'll just mention two. First, there's the issue that you mentioned, which is domestic politics, right? Every country has its domestic politics, and every country's domestic politics are of enormous importance, at least to it. And the United States is no exception on that. And I think you're all aware, there are a lot of people on the right who hear what Mr. Sadeqi says and what Mr. Rouhani says, and they don't trust it. And they believe that this is all a gigantic snow job, and that really the Iranians are looking to snooker us, and are really looking to pull a fast one, get us to agree to some kind of a deal that allows them to rebuild their nuclear program and nuclear weapons at a later point in time, in effect has happened with the North Koreans. And that's a very real issue out there. There are a lot of Americans and a lot of very influential Americans who do believe that. That said, I think that there are also countervailing forces that we need to keep in mind. It's worth keeping in mind the American public, Robin in particular was talking about how Iran is war-weary. The American public is also war-weary. And one of the, I think one of the most important arguments for the American public in accepting the interim deal, what's called the Joint Plan of Action, was that the opponents of the deal could not come forward with what a non-military alternative would be. And as long as that's the case, I think the administration is going to have a fair amount of wind in its sails. But nevertheless, there is going to be this opposition. Another point I would make, something to watch as analysts moving forward. I think a big issue for the president is going to be where the Congress is on his domestic agenda. Let's be very honest. President Obama has a very big, ambitious domestic agenda. That is what is nearest and dearest to his heart. And one of the reasons I think that he was willing to take on his own domestic opposition, take on the Wright, take on AIPAC, take on the Israelis, take on the Saudis, was because the Congress wasn't giving him anything on the stuff that he cared about. Okay? And I think that the good news here, if you want to put it that way for those people who want the deal, is that I suspect that the Democrats are going to get clobbered in our midterm elections, and the Republicans are going to give the president even less on his domestic agenda. And that being the case, I think the president will be more willing to take the Congress on when it comes time if there is a real deal. So that's one set of issues out there. The other set, though, that we have to be honest about is the differences between the United States and Iran. And we do have to recognize that there are different perspectives. And here again, what I hear talking to the administration, I would characterize it this way. On the nuclear deal, I think that the Iranians are going to find, probably have already found, that the administration is willing to be very flexible on issues of substance. That's the way I would describe it. I think that they're willing to be very pragmatic. And that actually the bigger issues for the administration are going to be the issues of principle. And if the Iranians insist on standing on principle, we're going to have big problems. So I don't see the United States ever giving on the right to enrich. The United States has never accepted that the Non-Proliferation Treaty provides a right to enrich. I think that the administration is willing to be flexible and pragmatic about what the Iranians actually do. But I think that's where Iran is going to have to come down. I think the same thing was probably going to be true on this issue of the lifting of sanctions. I think that the United States is prepared to be very flexible and very pragmatic in terms of allowing sanctions to erode, or not erode, to be held in abeyance, maybe a better way to put it, so that Iran's economy revives exactly the way that the Iranian people and I think the Rouhani administration want it. But on the specific issue of whether we lift, there could be a lot of resistance on that. First, because there are American sanctions for reasons having nothing to do with the nuclear issue, and also because Americans want some reason to believe that if we ever do catch the Iranians cheating, unlike with North Korea, we will have the ability to rapidly reimpose the sanctions, or, put it a better way, that the Iranians will always believe that, and that therefore we won't have to fear that they will ever cheat. So again, I think there's a lot of room on the pragmatic side. The question is really going to be how hard Iran stands on principle. And I'll say in closing, just two quick points. First, I think that it's also worth keeping in mind that, to go back to, in some ways, a point that I made earlier, one of the biggest things that I think is going to be pushing the nuclear deal along is that those who oppose it, and I think this is true on the Iranian side as well as on the American side, those who oppose it, I think, recognize that they can't be seen to kill the deal. Okay? Because this is really a battle for hearts and minds in their own country and hearts and minds all across the world. And the country who kills this deal that so much of the world is interested in and invested in is going to be seen as the bad guys. And I think both sides recognize that. I think it's one of the reasons why we actually got the JPA through on both sides, because neither group that opposes it in either country wanted to be seen as killing it. And I think that may push it forward. And the last point I'll make, and this comes to a point that in many ways that Karim made earlier, but I think it's also very important for this forum to keep in mind. What concerns me most is not the deal itself. Again, I'm actually quite in favor of the deal. I think it would be very good. But I think that what is most important is what the United States does in the region afterwards. And that gets to this point about the United States' disengagement from the region. In my mind, that has been the biggest problem. And if moving forward, the United States uses a nuclear deal with Iran as a, now we can forget about the Middle East altogether because we have solved the Iranian nuclear issue, that will make the region much, much worse. That will threaten our own interests and the interests of all of our friends. Whereas if the United States makes the deal and we become more engaged in the region, and I could see an argument for that as well, I think that would be the greatest help to the region. And so I think for those of you who are focused heavily on this deal and what happens and what are the terms and how many centrifuges, I don't think that's the place to put your emphasis at all. I think the real question is, what does the U.S. do after? That's what's going to make the difference for the region.
Thank you very much, Kenneth Pollack. Well, the good news is all of our panelists have, for a change, stuck to time. That means we have plenty of time for questions and answers. But before we throw to the floor, let me ask you a couple of quick questions regarding the points you just mentioned. You, Kenneth, mentioned the words pulling a fast one. And before in the articles we have, in the talks and magazine and newspaper articles that have been written about Iran recently in the spades, many are concerned that this is a false start or a real genuine start, a genuine change. Robin herself in one of her recent articles mentioned the Iran jinx, that many times everybody got their hopes up and thought something really different is going to happen. I'm going to throw this to the panel, anyone who wants to pick this up. How can we trust this different image this time more than the last times?
Glad to start.
Volunteers, yes.
Sure. And I will start by saying, and many Americans have made this point, you know, Ronald Reagan famously said about the Russians and arms control, trust but verify. I think that in the case of Iran, the United States position is just going to be verify. Now, I think that that's because there is this great deal of skepticism on the part of many Americans. I think that it is because of our bad experience with the North Koreans. From my own perspective as an analyst of Iran, I think that the changes are very genuine. I think they are genuine both in terms of the level of the populace and in terms of the Rouhani administration, but I also have my doubts about others within the Iranian power structure. And I worry, I wonder whether the leader will side with one group or the other. And again, that's why for me it is going to be very much about verify. That is one of the reasons why I think this issue of whether it's a lifting of sanctions or a suspension of sanctions or holding sanctions in abeyance, whatever terms we come up with, I think that's going to be very important because that's going to be the element of trust. That said, again, to go back to the first point I made, I think that if we can get that nuclear deal, and if there is a real sense that, you know, both sides are sticking to it, I think that's going to build enormous trust. And I think that does open up the possibility of cooperation on a whole variety of other issues.
Karim?
I think whether you're an optimist and you think the change in Tehran is real, or whether you're a cynic and you think it's not real, it actually doesn't really change what the policy should be, and that is to continue to try to test this.
Policy from the West?
The US policy. Because if you test it and it's real and the Iranians are really preparing for a different relationship with the United States, that's good for America, that's good for Iran, and it's good for the people of the Middle East. And if you test the policy and it turns out that the hardliners in Iran really aren't ready and the supreme leader sides with kind of the oppositionists, I think that only strengthens the international coalition against Iran. If you recall, the Bush administration wasn't prepared to engage Iran in the same way that the Obama administration was. And for that reason, you saw a very limited sanctions coalition against Iran during the Bush administration. It actually became a much more robust international coalition under Obama. So I've always thought that whether you're an optimist or whether you're a cynic really doesn't change what the policy should be, is that continue to try to test it.
Another issue that is mentioned a lot by analysts, journalists, people who have visited Iran recently, is the concern that the international aspect of this shift in policy, which we have been mentioning, the regional and the Western and the nuclear issues, are going to overshadow the domestic issues, which are the urgent subject of what the people inside the country actually are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Human rights concerns, economic concerns that are mentioned. How can we deal with those and make sure they are not forgotten with the priority of the nuclear issue and the Western relations issue?
Me? Oh. Look, we all are deeply concerned about human rights issues, support for extremist groups or groups that engage in violence. But you know, with every country, we tend to take one issue at a time and hope that we can build a foundation on which then to move beyond that. I mean, I would actually like to hear Mr. Sadeqi answer the question, for all of us who know Iran, how to explain the inconsistencies where your fine words of moderation and reflecting a different tone jive with the shouts of death to America, the fact that the Supreme Leader keeps talking about having deep suspicion, that it's very hard to reconcile the two. We understand that, you know, there's a diversity of opinion, and that's one of the things that makes Iran so interesting today. But how do you explain it to us?
Mr. Sadeqi, would you like to take that?
I would like to review some other points as well. First of all, the ideology. As a political scientist, I have been tackling with such an issue that what is exact ideology, you know. I don't believe that we can dichotomize, you know, the policies of, you know, countries into ideological one and non-ideological. Because the liberal democracy, that it is the main pursuit of United States policy, it does have ideology engraved in itself. So no country can do the foreign policy without an ideology. And also discourse of have the revolution as an example for other region or export the revolution has been the debate inside the countries. And in Iran, the late Imam Khomeini was, you know, the pro of having revolution as an example, not just sending or exporting it by force to some. So Iran does not, you know, just block, you know, sending its message outside. As the Quran says, الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا يَسْتَمِعُونَ الْقَوْلَ فَيَتَّبِعُونَ أَحْسَنَهُ. It presents its message all over the world as the United States does itself. You see, there are three myths in the US foreign policy. They say they believe that they have a mission. They believe that they are a chosen nation. They believe that they are in a, you know, just permanent war with evil, you know, as you maybe just read, you know, about the United States foreign policy. So it shouldn't be put some condition as Iran, you know, have to recognize or so. This is, you know, I believe the US choice to have the relation with other countries as the hostage of Israel. The Israel is not the main problem of us. It does have lots of problems with neighborhood. It does have problems in terms of energy, Mediterranean, you know, region with Lebanon. Even I just read, you know, it does have some islands of Saudi Arabia in its grasp. You know, Israel does have lots of, you know, conflicts and problems around us. It's not a just unique, you know, problem of Iran. With regard to the also enrichment, we do believe that, you know, the NPT members should have access to the peaceful, you know, nuclear energy, and Iran as a member of NPT and also IAEA, it does have its also rights as far as, you know, it does have the responsibility. So we shouldn't, with regard to the trust building, it is a two-way street, not a one-way one. Just we expect Iran to do so and so and so, and not expect the other sides to accomplish their, you know, just promises. If they have goodwill in just fulfilling their, I mean, the promises that they have in the negotiation, I see that good prospect for the region, inshallah.
Can I throw Robin's question
to you?
you
didn't answer my question.
On the domestic front.
Domestic front in what?
Human rights concerns.
Yes.
Domestic
and the
issues.
inconsistency.
Yes. I can tell you about that also. The human rights is the indigenous discourse in Iran, because it does have its root late, you know, to Cyrus, you know, the era. But, you know, in terms of as a political means to put pressure on some countries and just leave some others free hand to do whatever they would like. We don't accept such a way. You see in the region, all people are talking about Syria. Even a gentleman here was just considering that how we didn't bomb Syria. But in Bahrain, the majority of Shiite, they don't have the self-right to determine their own rights inside the country. We don't see any pressure on the regional actors that they put forces inside Bahrain. No, I didn't see any just propaganda against that. But inside Iran, I believe there are beliefs in terms of human rights from a cultural and also Islamic values, and we do not just rule out problems. Every country, it does have its own problems. They try to just remove the problems one after another, but let's not use it as a political means in an inconsistent way. That's my answer.
Yes, please, Mr.
I think in the trust building, the most important thing is the consequences. All parties know that if agreement is not concluded, is not respected, then we have to go to more crises, wars, maybe general war. So this is a certain guarantee. This is a certain assurance policy that we have. And I think the duration of negotiations matured everything, made everything mature, that we are not playing cards. It was not something that we gambled on, but something that all parties thought very well on all aspects, whether Western Americans or Iranians. So I think this might assure that it is not only on the Iranian side that we have to look for a trust, whether we trust them this time or not, but even for the other side. As for the other issues, I think Iran has many difficulties, but the others also have many difficulties in the region. And Iran is a very important actor in this region. No one can ignore Iran. Within a short while in Afghanistan, things would change. There is a withdrawal, as took place in Iraq. Now in Syria, the situation is critical. Situation in the Gulf, even in Saudi Arabia, changes might come. So the difficulties that others face, not only Iranians face, the others should see their difficulties also and should come to a certain moderation on all issues, not asking one party for a very high price and they exempt themselves from what they should pay. I think all this goes together.
Thank you very much. Shall we throw, yes, the gentleman in the front. Could you wait for a microphone if there is one hopefully coming this way? Thank you. Right behind you.
Thank you very much. I put aside Israel and the United States. I would like to ask the panel, what is the implication of the diplomatic shift for KRG, the new Kurdish state in Syria, and indeed the aspiration of many Kurds for Greater Kurdistan? Thank you very much.
Any volunteers?
I think good implications. KRG has very friendly relations with both sides, and any attempt will be in benefit of KRG. Any differences or crisis will be disadvantage for KRG. Now, relations between the West, United States, and Iran is developing in the good sense. We have to wait and see, but it is developing in the good sense. Relations with Turkey and Iran is also developing. So this might create a better environment for the KRG, a much better environment. And we can see the speeches today of our brother here and brother Dawood Oghlo. I think this is promising for the KRG.
Thank you. Mr. Zabari? Microphone, front row.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to hear our panelists on this important subject that matters to us in Iraq more than anybody else. I think the key issue is whether this negotiation, nuclear talks, will reach a final agreement or a permanent agreement. I think that is the key focus. Believe me, from my interaction with my Iranian counterparts, they don't link this neither to their position on Syria nor to their position toward Israel. I think that is a top national interest point for them. That's why the coming months are very, very important. And we have seen this diplomatic shift. And I can say from my position, it is genuine, it is serious, and they mean business to get out of this problem that is complicating everything else in terms of economic development, in terms of Iranian regional role and position. And they are worried, actually, more than anything else, about the rise of radicalism, of sectarianisms, of the Shia-Sunni rift. Mm-hmm. Recently, I have a long conversation with Mr. Rafsanjani, really to resume his role, his positive role, to reach out to Saudi Arabia, to the GCC countries, to help us, because we in Iraq are caught in the middle. I think that is one of the most serious, and the issue of terrorism. I mean, recently we've seen a number of Iranian diplomatic missions and interests have been the target of terrorist attacks. And that's why I think any linkage toward other issues is not in their mind as far as I can detect and understand. So this is a positive trend. And I think we all will benefit. And more than anybody else, Iraq will benefit really from less tension between the United States and Iran, primarily because we are friends to both of them. And sometimes we are envied, actually, how we can maintain this policy of balanced interest between two rivals. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Can I make a point?
Who is asking me that? 1 second. Let's take another question from behind and then comments. Can I ask you to please, right there. Yes. Can I ask everybody to keep the questions short and then time for comments after the questions are finished, please?
Hi, thank you. Scott Peterson from the Christian Science Monitor. This is a question for Dr. Sadeqi, and it's kind of a corollary on Robin's question, but also gets at the question of the debate going on in Iran since the election of President Rouhani. The question is, what you've said today has been very, very positive.
Sorry, can you
louder?
What you have said today has been very, very positive, and we've heard this also echoed by President Rouhani and also by Foreign Minister Zarif. But we've also seen just in the last few days that President Rouhani felt the need to basically tell military commanders in Iran to no longer use missile launches and other quite strong rhetoric, which really wasn't being particularly, moderate, if you will, in tone. In the region, and also he is engaged in several quite sharp cultural exchanges going on in Iran at the same time. So how can you be sure that despite this victory in the election, that President Rouhani and his team will prevail in this debate?
Thank you.
Shall I proceed?
Sure.
Yes. With regard to the different views, Iran is Islamic democracy, and everybody, every parties, every politician, it does have its just way to express itself. But as the main theme of Iranian foreign policy, if it would be vetted by the supreme leader, the administration would, just proceed in that way. As far as I have been just noticed, the different debates inside Iran. The Supreme Leader Ayatollah Uzma Khamenei has just supported, the process, that is underway, between Iran and 5+1. Inside the country, also there are some maybe different views in terms of how they proceed with this diplomatic initiative. In what way Iran should, for example, strengthen its position in terms of defense, for example, measures, how Iran, some military commanders have their comments. But all of them, as far as I just follow up, although I'm in terms of foreign policy, but I just browse, like something 1 hour or 2 hours a day inside, domestic, political news. All of them, at the same time that they just express their views on the, modality of the way that Iran is going ahead with the 5+1, but they, at the same time, admit that they are supportive of the administration because of the support of the Supreme Leader behind it.
Thank you. Robin, would you like to add?
Yeah, I wanted to say I always agree with Hoshyar, but I would quibble with one thing. Even though the nuclear issue is unto itself, the fact is that in Iran, the nuclear issue is perceived as the pivot to everything else that follows, whether it's the elections in parliament, the issue of women's rights, how much is allowed to be performed in movies, that everyone talks about the nuclear deal being the moment that changes, offers economic opportunity, opens the political environment. That doesn't lead to a Gorbachev-like era. But it is something that is accepted within the system, not trying to transform the system. And so I actually think the nuclear deal is linked to virtually everything that comes next, and that the nuclear deal will determine what happens over the next decade in Iran, arguably the next generation, on virtually every single front. And I think that with every single step that there is a deal on implementation, or that with each step, that Rouhani's popularity generally goes up. I think he's more popular today than he was the day after this election. But I also think that the divisions become deeper. That because there is this, for some political parties, this is an existential moment, and they understand that the parliament, which is now dominated 90% by conservatives and hardliners, may well become much more even or shift even more, and that will affect their fate for the next decade. So there is a huge amount at stake that yes, we can say the nuclear deal is unto itself, that it doesn't have automatic linkage to other things, and yet it will impact everything, and that we can't forget how important that is.
Thank you. The lady in the second row, could you wait for the microphone to come? Right there, in front of you.
Thank you. Actually, there are a couple of things that I had issues with in terms of what the speeches. Of course, there were very different views as to how Iran is and what Iran's role is actually in the region right now. But there's one thing that I would like to say to my American friends, and that is sometimes Americans tend to be very naive when it comes to Iran. They tend to look through, at Iran through rose-colored glasses. So I truly believe that because Iran is very ideologically based, a lot of times they look at it in terms of it's very easy to shift back, even though if it's about the issues right now. But once they get that win, once they get that deal, it's going to go back again, and it's going to be death to America. It's going to be no more going back to the American embassy and so on. So I just wanted to pinpoint this, to make this point. And also I wanted to say that in terms of the policy shift that we are seeing, unfortunately the policy shift is going to my dear Iranian friend, or to my dear Iranian brother, as Mam Jalal says, the policy, the way it's going in terms of foreign policy, it's going very positively. However, internal policy is going definitely in the wrong direction. What we are seeing in terms of hangings of Kurdish activists in Iran right now, the numbers have definitely increased ever since Mr. Rouhani has taken power. So I truly do hope that the policy shift does go all across the spectrum. It does not just stay with the foreign policy. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Could you please get the microphone there?
How do you compare President Khatami with President Rouhani. I think the conflict between the US and the Iran started from 1997. And the new conflict started from 2002. I think we should negotiate with the system that run the country. So the problem is not with the new conflict. The problem is when the new Islamic country in the region get power, because the Cold War had a situation, a condition that an Islamic country in the region was necessary. But the region changed. So the new conflict is that Iran wants to decrease the degree of conflict between the US and Iran, because the economic condition of Iran is very hard. So,
sorry, do you have a question as well?
Yeah. Just I want to say that how do you trust President Rouhani when we had President Khatami?
Thank you. Any takers?
Yeah,
Kenneth?
I'll be glad to, because I think this is a good question, and it gets to a point that I was trying to make before, and hopefully it'll also answer my friend's point about the naivete of Americans when it comes to Iran, which is, I think that this is exactly the argument being made by the right in the United States, and I think that it's a very powerful argument. The right is saying don't trust them, they're going to play you false, and I think that the Obama administration, and please, I am not an Obama administration official, and I tend to disagree with them on every single Middle Eastern issue. I just happen to agree with them that I think that the deal could be good for us. And here what the point that they make, and I think it is a good one, is that if we get the right deal, it will be a good that will be objectively good for us and for our allies. That's what happened with the interim deal, with the JPA. It is objectively good. It is beneficial to our side. And that's why the United States signed it. And the idea is going to be, how do you structure the comprehensive deal so that we can look at it and say, no matter what Iran's intentions, it is still good for us. And here I think this is an important question about the future, because I think that you're right. I can listen to what President Rouhani is talking about and say, I think this is terrific. And I do think that it reflects a genuine change on the part of at least part of the Iranian establishment and probably most of the Iranian people. But what we have seen in Iran is times can change. We saw Khatami followed by Ahmadinejad. And we don't want to see the same thing, and especially we don't want to have a deal that is conditioned purely on who is the president of Iran. So again, that's why I think that the key issues for the United States are going to be, how do we build into any deal the conditions that are going to allow us to feel comfortable no matter who is in charge in Iran. And I think the same is true for the Iranians, just to take a page from Dr. Sadri's.
Would you like to add anything to that?
What was the exact question?
Comparing Mr. Khatami to Mr. Rouhani.
Mr. Khatami was coming in an era that more political development, and the civil society was in sort of embryonic debate inside Iran. The people around him was just giving him a mandate to develop it more and more. And he basically put his agenda on that side of it, to just after the experience of just 8-year imposed war by Saddam Hussein against Iran, the political development, how parties could practice just working with each other. The debate like that was not enough environment to Iran to flourish. But Mr. Rouhani does have multifaceted aspects, agenda, mainly dealing with the promoting Iran's regional, way and the atmosphere. There are lots of opportunities to work with other actors inside the region. Extremism and violence, they are, I believe, the main issue that we could work with other players inside the region and also from outside. As the latest presence of Dr. Rouhani in the United Nations General Assembly brought an initiative that it was also in 2005 and 6 initiated in the United Nations, but the mechanism, how we can implement it, how we can cooperate against violence and extremism. These are the prospects that for Dr. Rouhani to just promote.
Can I add one little thing?
Yes, I've just been given our bill, so we have
the difference between Khatami and Rouhani is that Khatami came from kind of the periphery. He was director of the National Library, had been purged as culture minister. He was not a major player. Here's Rouhani, who'd been national security advisor for a generation. And he brings both sides with him. Khatami had one base, and Rouhani has appeals to a much wider political base and political experience.
Thank you. I've already promised one last question at this end, and then we will have to end this panel.
One very quick question. Actually, I was going to ask two questions, but...
One.
Okay, a very quick question to our distinguished Iranian guest. If a conflict happens today in Iran, and Mr. Rouhani was on one side and Mr. Qasem Soleimani was on the other, who do you think will prevail? Thank you.
That's
both.
On that note.
Shall I?
Sure.
The premise, for that question, I mean, it's a little bit not, precise. Because, both of them, they do have their own, legal, base for working. Mr. Qasem Soleimani is a commander of, the guard corps, that dealing with supreme leader in terms of defense matters. Mr. Rouhani is the head of the executive branch. I don't believe that they do have conflictual agenda, that one side against the other. If there would be some maybe different point of view with regard to the issues, not exactly the one that you mentioned, between the branches, there are lots of mechanisms to solve it. One is going to Expediency Council. But if there are some special cases, the Supreme Leader itself would be the best judge for that, I believe.
Thank you very much. On that note, thank you to all the panelists and the audience.